In the last video, we managed to get this 1975 280 SL moving under its own steam for the first time, probably in about 10 years. In this video, I'd like to take this car on a longer drive to get all the fluids circulating, like the coolant circulating, and hopefully, if all goes to plan and we don't break down, to actually drive to a body shop so that we can get this bonnet here painted and start putting all the front grills back on and the under bonnet insulation. There are several things we need to do to this bonnet before we can drive off down a bumpy road if we want to avoid damaging all the paintwork on this car. The bonnets should have rubber stops here and here, and both of those are missing, so we've ordered those from Phoebe. They should arrive in the next day or two. There should be two rubber bump stops that sit just here. Now, we've taken this one off the parts car, but it is damaged, so we'll need to order a couple of these from the SL shop. At present, the bonnet is just held here by these temporary fittings here, so what we're going to do is replace those with proper stainless steel fittings and flange bolts, which should be on there. There are two brackets which hold the bonnet up. We painted these, or primed these I should say, ages ago when we first got the car to stop them rusting. These brackets are fitted to the top of the hood here with a special clip like this. These are no longer available from Mercedes. This is the one from the parts car. They are available from the SL shop as reproductions, but they're horribly expensive. I think they cost about £3.50 each just for that clip. The sprockets will go off to the paint shop. The springs will also go off to the paint shop. We'll take these rubber bits off here and clean them there just to stop the spring touching the side of the car. And the bracket is attached to the car with this special fitting here, which once again we took off the parts car, and we'll just put that on a wire wheel and clean that up. And on that fitting is a flat form wave washer. We should be able to get a new stainless steel one of those from Aku. Then we've got the bonnet catch, which we took off the parts car and primed. We'll need to paint that, probably in the Eastwood Extreme Chassis black with a satin finish just to match this temporarily. We've got stainless steel screws in there. We just need to make sure that the cable is actually connected and that this works. And then once the bonnet has been painted, we can get some under bonnet insulation from the SL shop and just stick that on with the proper trim fix glue. We've got those brackets and hinges in, and now for the first time since I've had this car, we should be able to take this wooden pole out and see if the bonnet actually supports itself. And will you look at that? Just need to adjust the hinges, make sure nothing's knocking. We'll put the one rubber stop that we've got in there and wait for the ones from the SL shop to come. Now, in theory, it should just be a matter of unclipping this here, which is just the pin that holds this in. We'll just put a tiny dab of grease on that end bit there. Now, it would be worthwhile putting a new bonnet release cable on this car, which we'll probably do, because if that bonnet release cable snaps, it's a real bugger of a job to get the bonnet open. It is slightly fiddly getting that little pin through there, but you should be able to do it just through this hole like that. And then that should just screw down there. We'll double check from underneath that that's all clipped in nicely. Of course, it would have been far too simple if all of those screws had just gone in. This screw here is only going halfway down, and rather than trying to force it in, these are new stainless steel screws here, rather than forcing it in and damaging the head or the threads, we're just going to go and get a tap and run that through there. But we won't do that another time. 3 screws in there should be just fine to actually test and see if this works. We've only got one of these, but that is better than nothing until we get the other one. So, having secured the bonnet catch and ascertained that it actually works, now we just need to see if it actually lines up, and if, when we close the bonnet, we can actually open it again, because... Okay, let's have a little look and see what's going on. We can see that is not lining up to that hole. The reason that isn't lining up is probably because these screws here will need adjusting to take the bonnet either forward or backwards and possibly tilt it. The other way you can adjust things is by adjusting this plate, which is a much quicker and easier way to do it, because once this bonnet is painted, we will need to line it up properly. So I think in the first instance, we're just going to use this plate here to line up. Well, we've closed that bonnet. The question is, will we now be able to open it with the bonnet release catch? We will soon find out. Hopefully there'll be a big loud spring as that springs open. Whoops, wow. Well, that works. Obviously the bonnet shouldn't spring all the way open. That should catch this here, but this is actually not quite aligned. Now that might be because they put the panel in wrong, or it might be because this here has a little bit of alignment, needs to be aligned better. So you can see that is only just catching that. That needs to be all the way under there to stop the bonnet springing all the way up. So in the first instance, I'm going to see if we can adjust this, but probably what needs to happen is the whole bonnet needs to go back a tad. Before I take this car onto the open road, there are a few things I need to do. Not least, I need to put fuel in the car. But before I put fuel in the car, I want to take off the rusty old fuel pump and refurbish it. We've taken the rusty pump off the car and started stripping that rust off. And our plan will be to replace all of these rusty screws with stainless steel ones and put it back on the car. We're just going to give that a couple of coats of matte silver rust encapsulator. We finished painting this pump with some Eastwood Extreme Chassis Black, and that should protect it for a good few years. Now this particular pump came off a Datsun 280 ZX. I have mentioned this before, but the Datsun 280 ZX is used exactly the same pump, or almost exactly the same pump as the early Mercedes, the low pressure Bosch pumps on a Mercedes. The difference being that the Datsun pumps are considerably cheaper and more readily available. The problem with the pump that we took off our 450 SL parts car is that it has an intermittent problem. Sometimes it works absolutely fine, and then other times it just can't produce enough pressure, and what happens is the car starts to stumble and it feels like it's going to cut out on me. So I'm just going to whip the pump off that's on the car at the moment and put this one back on, and then we should be ready to go for a test drive. Now, unfortunately, having fitted this fuel pump here, I'm turning the key and nothing is happening. I'm just putting a battery directly onto the fuel pump, and I can hear that it wants to turn, but it isn't turning. And it suddenly occurs to me that while I was painting this, it was hung up to dry, it fell off the hook. And I'm wondering if in some way or shape or form this was damaged and the pump no longer turns, which would be a catastrophe. So I'm going to have to take this back off the car and actually bench test it. This is the pump of the 450 SL parts car. This is the eBay pump, which was working absolutely fine until I painted it. It fell off its painting hook because basically the tissue and the tape absorbed petrol and then it slipped off. So in the first instance, I'm going to take the 4 screws out of here and see if there's anything obvious going on inside the pump. In the second instance, what I may do is swap all the little veins inside this pump with this pump. This pump's working electrically fine, but it doesn't seem to create the right pressure. It is obviously really important that you make sure these pumps go back the way you took them apart. Now I can see that this pump here turns freely, but when we put power to it, it's not turning. These little veins here and this here looks to be in much better condition than this pump here, which will take to pieces. So my plan is simply to swap these little bearings here, for want of a better word, and this vein with this pump, and see if that cures the problem of that pump not having sufficient pressure. So I've taken all of the top of this pump, including this piece here. I've taken the veins, the spinning bit, and the seal from this pump, transplanted it onto this pump, and let's see if this pump, which this pump works electrically, let's see if it actually creates enough pressure now. So we've rebuilt that fuel pump from the other fuel pump. We've got the fuel pump relay bridged. Let's see what happens if we turn the key. Do we get the fuel pump buzzing? I can hear that buzzing. Are we building any pressure down here? Not yet. So the pump is running, we're not building any pressure. That's either because the pump isn't primed properly, or more likely that there's not enough fuel in the car to actually build pressure. So let's whiz off to the fuel station, get some more fuel and see how we go. Now with an extra 5 litres of fuel in there and the fuel pump still bridged, let's see if we're building pressure. You can see that we are now building pressure, but not a lot. I don't think it'll make an iota of difference, but we're going to put another 5 litres of fuel in the car and see if that makes a difference to the fuel pressure. So we've got just under 15 litres of fuel in this car. Let's see if that makes any difference to the fuel pressure. It doesn't. Well, to say that's disappointing would be an understatement, but looking on the bright side of things, had we not fitted a fuel pressure gauge in here, we could have heard the pump turning and wondered why this car starts and then dies or has no power. But having fitted this fuel pressure gauge, we know exactly what the problem is, that this car is not building sufficient fuel pressure, and that, I believe, is because of a faulty fuel pump. In a last bit of optimism, let's just see if by taking this fuel pump to pieces and putting it back together again, it miraculously works. Oh my goodness me, it does work. Oh no. Oh no, no. Okay, so I'm gonna try one last thing. I'm gonna put this pump back on the car, having swapped all the head off it, which was probably not a great idea, and see if that works. Okay, third time lucky. We've got the fuel pump relay bridged. We've got the other fuel pump on. Let's see what happens to the fuel pressure. Whoa, look at that. Okay, that fuel pressure shoots straight up to 2 bar, which is what we need. So let's tighten down all the bolts, secure everything on the fuel pump, and let's see if we can actually take this car for a test drive. Bridge the fuel pump relay. Incidentally, if you ever need to bridge the fuel pump relay and get it continuous, it's the top 2 plugs, 87 and 30, I believe. So let's put the fuel pump relay back in. So now I'm expecting this car to start right on up. There we go. The other problem we have is with the steering wheel, whereby it doesn't slide all the way down over the splines, and I just need to ascertain whether it's the splines on this unit here that are damaged or the splines on the actual steering wheel. This is the steering column from our parts car, and you can see when we slide the steering wheel on, we have that few millimeter gap. And if you left it like that, what you'll find is that you won't be able to secure the nut in there to actually tighten the steering wheel on. So that tells me that the splines on the steering wheel itself are damaged, and we're going to have to see if we can repair them. The way we're going to repair the splines is to take this steering column apart, take this piece out, and see if we can bash that in to the steering wheel to straighten out the splines. And if we can do that several times, it doesn't matter if we damage this, because this is just a spare. That might straighten out the splines, allow us to slide on the steering wheel, which will get us one step closer to being able to drive on the road. So in order to take this up to pieces, you need to take these 2 screws out here, and then this fitting here will have to come off. We're going to slide this here off, this cowling off the end, and then see if we can bash this off with a hammer. But in order to get that cowling off, I think we have to undo this rear seal first. That actually came off, or is coming off, remarkably easy with just a few bashes of the hammer. Now, in theory, this should just lift all the way out. In theory, there you go. There are 2 very strong circlips on this steering column, and once you have got both of those circlips off, you will be able to tap off this piece here, revealing the bearings beneath. You can see that there's still splines sticking out of there. That should slot all the way down. Now, making sure the wife is nowhere to be seen, we can put this in this way, spin it round, and there we go. That now fits on. Now, in theory, this should just fit on there, which it does, allowing us to get a nut on there so that the steering wheel doesn't come off on our first journey. That steering wheel now fits on enough so that you can get a nut on there. We've ordered that nut from Mercedes, and I'll give you the part number below. There are a few different styles of fitting on the later cars. They actually had a hex bolt that kept the steering wheel on, and on the earlier cars they had a nut, but there are two types, a thinner nut and a thicker nut, so you need to check with Mercedes the chassis number for the correct one if yours happens to be missing, which ours was. That's the correct nut for this car according to Mercedes. That's the number there, N308-675-014-002, and that steering wheel now fits all the way on, so we just need to tighten that on. When you come to put the steering wheel on, the steering column has got this handy little mark here, and that should be pointing upwards, and then when you put the steering wheel on, it should be straight like that. Next up, we just need to glue this in there. When you glue it in, you just need to make sure it's completely central. We're actually going to use some double-sided tape to get that in, and you need to make sure that the star is orientated in the right way. We've stuck that central star in there just with double-sided tape, and this just needs to clip over there just to finish this off. There we go. Slowly but surely this is starting to look like a Mercedes. We've got the steering wheel on. I haven't torqued up the nut because I'm almost certain we're going to have to take that off, retake this out, and when we test drive the car, just to double check all the electrics are working. Similarly, I haven't tightened up any of this down here because I'm pretty sure we're going to have to take that out to make sure all the fans and everything else are working, but we're just about ready to take this car for a drive. So it's the first time my darling wife has ever sat in this car. Grace, are you going to go for a ride as well? Yeah. Let's see if it starts. Okay, good luck. It's amazing that after 10 years this car is actually going out onto the open road for the first time. Hey, come back! I'm going to finish this video here. In the next video, I think we're going to take this car to the body shop and get that bonnet repainted. We've got to secure the lights on this car, fix a snapped cable in the soft top mechanism, put in the other chair, and then put in the underneath kick panels, and then at a later date start thinking about the vacuum system and all the air conditioning in this car, because none of that's connected up at the moment. It's been a really long 2-year journey getting this car to this stage, but we really are getting there. The progress from here on out, I think, will be speedy.